He lost his company at 8:17 p.m., but his marriage ended 3 minutes later, under a chandelier bright enough to make cruelty look expensive. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of the Whitmore Foundation Gala in a tailored black suit, his tie still perfectly knotted, one hand resting beside a glass of untouched sparkling water. Around him, Manhattan's cleanest smiles floated above silk dresses, navy tuxedos, diamond earrings, and quiet conversations about money pretending to be charity. The ballroom sat on the 53rd floor of a hotel overlooking Central Park, where the winter trees looked like dark veins against the snow. A pianist played something soft near the staircase. Waiters moved between guests with silver trays. Cameras flashed whenever Lauren Whitmore Caldwell turned her head. She had always known how to stand where the light found her first. Then the giant screen behind the stage changed. It had been showing a loop of children's hospitals, scholarship checks, and corporate sponsors. Suddenly, the loop froze, flickered once, and became a breaking financial headline from a business network. Caldwell Aerospace files for emergency bankruptcy protection. Founder Ethan Caldwell removed from board. No one gasped at first. People like them had learned to make silence look polite. But Ethan heard the room shift. A fork touched porcelain too hard. A woman near the floral wall stopped laughing mid-breath. Someone whispered his name as if it were a stain spreading across white linen. Ethan looked at the screen, then at Lauren. For one strange second, he thought she might reach for his hand. They had practiced moments like this in easier storms, standing shoulder to shoulder while cameras waited for weakness. But Lauren did not move toward him. She looked at the headline the way a collector looks at a cracked vase, calculating whether it still belongs in the house. Her champagne-colored gown caught the chandelier light as she stepped closer, slow enough for people to notice, calm enough for them to listen. Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket. Once. Twice. Again. He did not check it. The life he had built was already announcing itself without him. Lauren stopped in front of him, her pale face composed, her red lipstick unbroken, her wedding ring bright on her left hand. Ethan lowered his voice. "We should talk somewhere private." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Private. The word was soft, almost amused. "You made me a public wife, Ethan. Do not ask for privacy now that you are a public failure." The pianist missed a note. It was tiny, but Ethan heard it. So did half the room. Lauren slipped the ring from her finger. She did not throw it. She was too careful for that. She simply held it between two fingers, as if it had become something borrowed and inconvenient, then placed it on the polished marble floor between them. The small circle of platinum made the faintest sound when it touched stone. Somehow, that sound traveled farther than any shout could have. Ethan looked down at it. He remembered the day he had bought it, not because it was expensive, but because Lauren had once said she hated anything ordinary. He had believed love meant learning every preference and mistaking precision for devotion. "I married a man with a future," Lauren said, clear enough for the first row to hear. Not a memory. A few guests looked away. Others did not. Some people hid their curiosity behind crystal glasses. Some did not bother hiding it at all. Ethan felt the heat of attention crawl over his collar, but he did not bend to pick up the ring. Not yet. His hand remained at his side, fingers relaxed, the way his father had once taught him before board meetings. Never let the room see where it hurt. Lauren leaned closer, lowering her voice only slightly. "My attorneys will contact you in the morning. I will not have my family name attached to whatever comes next." Her family name. Ethan almost smiled at that. 5 years of marriage, and she still spoke as if his life had been a wing added to her estate. Behind her, the headline changed again. Analysts were already discussing debt, failed leadership, emergency restructuring, words sharp and clean as surgical tools. Ethan saw his reflection in the dark edge of the screen. Short brown hair, tired eyes, a suit that still fit a man the world had decided no longer existed. He could have defended himself. He could have said the numbers did not make sense, that the vote had happened without him, that signatures had appeared where he had not placed them. But in that room, truth would have sounded like begging. So he stayed silent. He bent down at last, picked up the ring, and placed it gently on the nearest table beside a folded white napkin. Then he adjusted his tie, not because it needed adjusting, but because it was the last ritual of control he had left. Lauren watched, waiting for anger, pleading, something messy enough to justify her exit. Ethan gave her none of it. He turned away from the chandelier, the cameras, the guests who had suddenly forgotten how to speak to him, and walked toward the elevator with the same measured steps he had used when entering as a billionaire. Only now, every step sounded different. The marble did not echo success anymore. It echoed subtraction. By the time the elevator doors opened, no one had followed him. No friend touched his shoulder. No board member called his name. No wife stood beside him. Ethan Caldwell stepped inside alone, carrying nothing but a phone full of missed calls, a reputation collapsing in real time, and a silence so heavy it felt almost alive. The elevator descended 53 floors in less than a minute, but for Ethan Caldwell, it felt like the slow removal of an entire life. The mirrored walls held him from every angle, repeating the same man in a black suit, the same clean shave, the same short brown hair, the same tie still held in place by muscle memory and stubborn pride. His phone kept vibrating, lighting his pocket with names that no longer meant safety. Board counsel, chief financial officer, unknown number, press office, Lauren's attorney. Each buzz sounded small, almost polite, as if ruin had learned manners in expensive rooms. When the doors opened into the hotel lobby, warm air rushed toward him carrying the scent of polished wood, white lilies, and winter coats drying near the entrance. The doorman recognized him. Of course he did. Ethan had donated to the hotel's holiday fund for years. He had hosted investor breakfasts upstairs, charity luncheons in the East Room, and one anniversary dinner for Lauren where the flowers had cost more than most people's monthly rent. But now the doorman's eyes moved from Ethan's face to the television above the bar, then back again with a careful softness that felt worse than judgment. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell," he said, but the words arrived late. Ethan nodded once and stepped into the Manhattan cold without asking for his car. His driver was not at the curb. That was the first small confirmation. Not the headline, not the missing board votes, not Lauren's ring on the marble, but the empty space where a black sedan used to wait. Snow had begun to fall in thin, bright pieces beneath the hotel awning. Yellow cabs slid past on Fifth Avenue. A couple in wool coats hurried by laughing under one umbrella, their shoulders touching as if the world had not changed at all. Ethan stood there for 3 seconds, then started walking south. At 46 years old, he had built companies that crossed oceans, signed contracts that moved thousands of jobs, and sat across from governors, senators, and men who smiled only when numbers obeyed them. Yet he suddenly found himself counting blocks like a man trying not to think. 1 block to the bank office, 2 blocks to the private elevator entrance, 7 blocks to the apartment that had never felt like home unless he arrived before Lauren and stood in the quiet. His shoes were not made for slush. The leather darkened at the edges as he walked. By the time he reached Caldwell Aerospace headquarters, the lights in the upper floors were still on, but the brass letters over the entrance looked unfamiliar, as if someone had polished his name until it no longer belonged to him. A security guard behind the glass saw him approach and straightened with visible discomfort. Ethan pulled his key card from his wallet and touched it to the reader. Red light. He tried again. Red light. The guard opened the door only wide enough to speak through the gap. "Mr. Caldwell, I am sorry. I received instructions 10 minutes ago. No entry without board authorization." Ethan looked past him toward the lobby. The marble desk. The model aircraft under glass. The wall of photographs from launches, factory openings, scholarship days. In one picture, he was holding scissors beside a ribbon in Houston, smiling at a group of engineers in blue hard hats. In another, Lauren stood beside him at a donor wall, her hand tucked neatly into his arm. "I understand," Ethan said. He did not ask who sent the instructions. He already knew the shape of betrayal, even if the signatures were still hidden. The guard swallowed, then lowered his voice. "I am sorry, sir." That word, sir, almost broke something in him. Not because it was loyal, but because it was kind. Ethan placed the key card on the lobby ledge and stepped back into the snow. After that, the city began to erase him with astonishing efficiency. The private bank froze his business account pending review. His corporate phone lost access to encrypted mail. A news van slowed near the curb, then rolled forward when he turned his face away. At the apartment tower, The night concierge avoided his eyes while explaining that Mrs. Caldwell had requested all personal deliveries be redirected and that any residence access questions should go through legal counsel. Ethan did not argue. He only asked if a small overnight bag had been left for him. The concierge disappeared for 4 minutes and returned with a gray suitcase he recognized from weekend conferences. Inside were 2 white shirts, 1 navy tie, a shaving kit, a winter sweater he had not worn in years, and a sealed envelope from Lauren's attorney. Nothing personal. No photograph. No watch from their anniversary trip. No note in her handwriting. On the sidewalk, Ethan set the suitcase upright and rested one hand on the handle. The snow was thicker now, blurring the glass tower above him until its lights looked like distant windows in someone else's life. He could see his reflection in the revolving door, a man still dressed like he had somewhere important to be, while every place that once opened for him had quietly learned to stay closed. For the first time that night, he loosened his tie by half an inch. Not enough for anyone passing by to notice. Just enough to breathe. By 11:42 p.m., Ethan Caldwell had learned that a city could be crowded and still make one man feel completely unseen. He walked east with the gray suitcase rolling unevenly behind him, its plastic wheels catching in shallow seams of snow along the sidewalk. Fifth Avenue thinned into narrower streets, and the polished entrances of luxury buildings gave way to closed coffee shops, glowing laundromats, and corner stores with handwritten signs taped inside the windows. His shoes were damp. His fingers had gone stiff around the suitcase handle. The collar of his wool coat had begun to collect melting flakes, but he did not turn it up. Some small part of him still moved as if cameras were nearby, as if posture could protect what reputation no longer could. At a red light, he stopped beside a bus shelter and saw his face reflected in the glass advertisement for a downtown condominium. Behind the printed promise of private terraces and river views, his own reflection looked almost misplaced. Short brown hair flattened by snow, jaw tight from cold, tie loosened just enough to admit defeat without announcing it. He thought of calling someone. Then he looked at the names in his phone and realized the list had become a museum of people who liked him best when his calendar was full and his signature still opened doors. He slid the phone back into his coat pocket without dialing. Hunger reached him quietly, not as pain, but as a hollow weight beneath the ribs. He had not eaten since a lunch meeting where 3 men had smiled across a walnut table while knowing more than they said. A few blocks later, he found the smell before he found the light. Warm broth, toasted bread, onions softening on a griddle, something bright with lemon and black pepper cutting through the cold. On the corner of East 29th Street, beneath the soft glow of a street lamp, a small food truck stood open against the night. Its white paint was clean but weathered, with a green stripe along the side and a chalkboard menu propped near the curb. Harper Street Kitchen, it read in careful block letters. Late-night soup, grilled chicken bowls, coffee. The line was short, just a delivery driver in a padded jacket and an older woman holding a paper bag close to her. Chest for warmth. Ethan almost kept walking. Men like him used to pass trucks like that from the back seat of a black sedan, protected by tinted glass and appointments stacked in 15-minute blocks. But the scent of soup held him there with a gentleness he was too tired to resist. He checked his wallet under the awning of a closed bookstore. One $20 bill. A few receipts. A metal card that might no longer work by morning. He stepped to the window when the line cleared and studied the chalkboard as if it were a contract. The cheapest item was a cup of tomato basil soup for $6. "One soup, please," he said, his voice rougher than he expected. "Small is fine." The woman inside turned from the steam table, and for a moment, the night seemed to pause around the edges. She was in her 30s, white, with short chestnut hair tucked behind one ear and a navy apron tied over a simple black sweater. Her face was calm, practical, familiar in a way Ethan could not immediately place. She looked at him once, then at the suitcase beside his leg, then back at his face. Not with pity, not with surprise sharpened into gossip. She looked as if she were reading a page she had kept folded for years. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. Ethan's hand tightened around the bill. The name sounded different from her mouth. Not like the news anchors upstairs. Not like Lauren dropping it on marble. Softer. Almost careful. He searched her face, embarrassed by his own blankness. He had met thousands of people in boardrooms, factory floors, ribbon cuttings, donor dinners, airport lounges. Their names had passed through his life like business cards placed in assistants' hands. But this woman did not look like someone passing through. She looked like someone who had been waiting, though not in a way that demanded anything from him. "I am sorry," Ethan said. "Have we met?" A small smile touched her face, not wounded, not offended. "A long time ago," she said. She reached for a paper cup, filled it with soup until steam rose in thick curls, then added a piece of warm bread wrapped in wax paper. "You probably do not remember." Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but no answer came. The cold, the headline, Lauren's ring, the locked doors, the suitcase on the sidewalk. All of it seemed to narrow into the simple fact that someone had recognized him and had not stepped away. He held out the $20 bill. She did not take it. "Tonight, this one is on me." "I can pay," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, placing the cup on the counter between them. "That is not why I said it." For the first time since the elevator doors had closed above the ballroom, Ethan felt something inside him loosen that was not his tie. He picked up the soup with both hands, letting the heat settle into his palms. The woman watched him with steady brown eyes, and the city moved around them, cabs hissing through slush, traffic lights changing for streets that did not care who had fallen. "My name is Emily Harper," she said. 10 years ago, you stopped for me on the worst day of my life." Ethan looked at the green stripe on the truck, the careful letters on the menu, the steam rising between them, and somewhere beneath the ruin of that night, a memory began to stir. The memory did not arrive all at once. It came the way morning light enters a closed room, first as a thin line, then as shapes slowly returning to their names. Ethan stood beside the food truck with the paper cup warming his hands, and 10 years fell away from the snow on East 29th Street to a spring afternoon on the Lower East Side, when he had still believed time was something he could command. Back then, he was 36, newly praised in business magazines, moving through New York in a charcoal suit with a navy tie and a calendar divided into 10-minute spaces. Caldwell Aerospace had just won a federal supplier contract. Investors wanted him in Boston by nightfall. His assistant had been speaking through his earpiece about departure times, traffic delays, and a private car waiting 2 blocks away. But Ethan remembered slowing down because of a sound that did not belong to the rhythm of the street. It was not loud. It was a young woman trying very hard not to cry while holding herself together in public. She stood beside a small white food cart with peeling paint and a crooked hand-lettered sign that read Harper Soup and Sandwiches. 2 city inspectors were explaining something about unpaid permit fees, missing renewal documents, and a violation notice that had gone unanswered. A tow truck idled at the curb, its amber lights turning slowly in the daylight. People passed by with coffee, headphones, shopping bags, and the practiced indifference of a city that had seen too many small heartbreaks to stop for all of them. The young woman had short chestnut hair then too, though it was messier, tucked beneath a faded baseball cap. Her apron was dusted with flour. Her hands were red from washing dishes in cold water. On the cart counter sat a metal cash box, a stack of napkins, a jar of plastic forks, and 3 unsold containers of soup losing steam beneath clear lids. Ethan had meant only to glance. He had meant to keep walking. But she said, "Please, I sent the paperwork. I mailed it 3 weeks ago. This card is all I have." Something in that sentence stepped directly in front of his schedule. Ethan removed the earpiece from his ear and told his assistant he would call back. The young woman looked up when he approached, embarrassed before she even knew what he wanted, as if help itself might cost her dignity. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked, not with the voice he used in boardrooms, but with the one he had learned from his mother when a stranger needed space to breathe. One inspector explained the amount: $1,840 in fees, late penalties, storage charges if the cart was removed, and a hearing date 3 weeks away. Ethan remembered the number because it had been so small compared to the numbers he signed every day, and so enormous on her face. Emily Harper had opened her cash box with trembling fingers. There were $17, some quarters, and a folded photograph of an older woman taped inside the lid. Her mother, he guessed, though he did not ask. "I can pay half by Friday," she said. "I just need 1 more week." The inspector was not cruel. That almost made it worse. He was simply tired and bound to the forms on his clipboard. Ethan took out his wallet, then stopped. Money alone would solve the hour, not the trap. He asked for the violation notice, read the permit code, and called his company counsel from the sidewalk. Within 12 minutes, the fees were paid by card, the hearing was moved, and a local small business attorney Ethan knew from a charity breakfast was asked to review the renewal problem before the end of the day. Emily watched him as if he had just changed the weather. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Ethan looked at the cart, the soup cooling on the counter, the handwritten sign trying to look braver than it felt. "Because someone should have opened the letter before they closed your business," he said. She tried to thank him, but her voice caught, and that made him turn slightly toward the street, giving her privacy without making a performance of kindness. The attorney called back. His driver called twice. His assistant texted that Boston would be difficult if he did not leave in the next 5 minutes. Ethan handed Emily a business card, though not the polished metal one he gave investors. This one was plain, with his office number and an email address. "Send every notice to this contact until it is fixed," he said, "and keep copies of everything." She nodded with both hands holding the card like it might blow away. "I will pay you back." Ethan almost smiled. "Build the business. That will be enough." Then he bought 2 soups he did not need, left a $20 bill under the napkin jar, and walked to the waiting car before she could make gratitude heavier than the moment. For him, it became one small detour on a crowded day. A delayed flight, a missed call, a line item on a credit card statement. By the next morning, 10 new emergencies had taken its place. But for Emily, standing beside a food cart that was no longer being towed, it had been the day the city stopped taking and gave one thing back. Now, 10 years later, with snow gathering on his shoulders and her name painted across a cleaner, brighter truck, Ethan understood the quiet mathematics of mercy. He had forgotten the day because he could afford to. She had remembered because she could not. Emily did not ask Ethan where he would sleep that night. She did not ask how much money he had left, whether Lauren had called, or how a man who once occupied the top floor of an aerospace company had ended up standing beside a food truck near midnight with snow in his hair. She simply slid the service window closed halfway, turned off the front menu light, and said, "Come around to the side door before the soup gets cold." Ethan stood still for a moment, the paper cup warming his hands, unsure whether to accept a kindness that had not been wrapped in ceremony. Then he lifted the suitcase over a ridge of slush and followed the narrow path between the truck and the curb. Inside, the space was smaller than he expected, bright with stainless steel, stacked paper bowls, hanging utensils, labeled containers, and the clean smell of basil, soap, and toasted bread. A small heater hummed beneath the prep counter. Emily pointed to a folding stool near the back. "Sit there. Eat slowly." It was not a suggestion. It had the firmness of someone who had fed tired people before and knew hunger made pride behave strangely. Ethan sat with his knees nearly touching a case of bottled water and unwrapped the bread. The soup tasted simple, rich, and honest, the kind of food that did not try to impress anyone but still left warmth behind. Emily moved around him with practiced quiet, wiping the counter, counting cash, sealing containers for donation pickup, turning knobs, checking temperatures. She did not stare. That was the mercy of it. She allowed him to be in the room without making him the subject of the room. After several minutes, Ethan said, "You should not feel responsible for me." Emily rinsed a ladle, set it carefully on a towel, and looked over her shoulder. "I do not." The answer was so calm that he had no defense against it. "Then why are you helping?" he asked. She folded the towel once, then again. "Because 10 years ago, you helped me without making me feel small. I remember that part more than the money." Ethan lowered his eyes to the soup. Outside, a bus sighed at the curb and pulled away. The city kept moving, indifferent and alive. "I had more to give then," he said. "Maybe," Emily replied. "But you did not give from the excess. You gave from attention. That is rarer." He almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. The word attention sounded too gentle for the wreckage waiting for him in the morning. His company was gone from his hands. His apartment was locked behind legal language. His marriage had become an envelope inside a suitcase. Yet Emily spoke as if the smallest part of him, the part that once stopped on a sidewalk for a stranger, was still intact. She opened a cabinet, took out a clean navy apron, and placed it on the counter beside him. Ethan looked at it, then at her. "What is that?" "Work," she said. "Not charity." He blinked slowly. "Emily, I do not know anything about running a food truck. You know how to show up on time, read numbers, solve problems, and speak to people without shouting. That is more than enough for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning? 5:30. She tapped a clipboard hanging by the refrigerator. We prep at 5:30, open at 7, close the breakfast rush at 10:30, restock by 11. It pays $24 an hour to start. Cash tips are split evenly. You can use the office cot for tonight if you do not have somewhere better. Ethan looked toward the tiny rear corner she called an office. It was hardly more than a desk built into the wall, a shelf of binders, a laptop, a corkboard covered in supplier notes, and a narrow cot folded beneath a gray blanket. He should have said no. The old version of him, the one who measured life in equity, air miles, and invitations, would have found a hotel, called a lawyer, made 3 strategic moves before sunrise. But the old version of him had not been able to open a single door that night. This small truck had. "I cannot let you do this," he said quietly. Emily wiped a ring of steam from the window with her sleeve. "You are not letting me do anything. You are accepting a job." She untied her apron and hung it on a hook. "There is a difference." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He picked up the navy apron, feeling the stiff cotton between his fingers. No silk lining, no monogram, no symbol of rank, just fabric meant to be used. Something about that steadiness reached him more deeply than comfort would have. Emily handed him a marker and a blank name tag. "First names only on the truck," she said. "Customers do not need your resume with their coffee." Ethan wrote Ethan in careful capital letters. His handwriting looked unfamiliar without a contract beneath it. Emily glanced at the name tag and gave a small approving nod. "Good. Tomorrow, you learn the register." He pinned the tag to the apron and folded it over his arm as if it mattered. Outside, snow softened the curb. The headlines moved on to the next crisis, and somewhere above the city, Lauren was probably already sleeping in clean sheets without his name beside hers. But inside the truck, with soup in his hands and work waiting before dawn, Ethan felt the first quiet outline of a life that had not asked permission to begin again. At 5:30 the next morning, New York was still blue with cold, and Ethan Caldwell was standing inside Harper Street kitchen with a navy apron over his white shirt, learning that onions did not care who a man used to be. Emily handed him a knife small enough for the work and large enough to humble him, then placed a cutting board in front of him with 3 yellow onions and 1 instruction. "Thin slices, even if you are tired." Ethan did not tell her he had slept only 2 hours on the narrow cot behind the supply shelf. He did not tell her that every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lauren's ring on the marble floor, the red light on the office door, the concierge holding his suitcase as if it were evidence. Instead, he washed his hands, rolled his sleeves to his forearms, and began. The first slices were uneven. Emily glanced over once, adjusted his grip without making him feel foolish, and went back to stirring a pot of steel-cut oatmeal with cinnamon apples. By 7 o'clock, the service window was open, coffee was brewing, and a line had formed beneath the small awning. Delivery drivers, nurses from a nearby clinic, 2 construction supervisors, a teacher with tired eyes, a man in a postal jacket who called Emily M and asked for the usual. No one cared that Ethan's name had been on a financial headline 12 hours earlier. They cared whether the coffee was hot, whether the breakfast bowl had enough salsa, whether the paper bag had napkins. For 3 hours, Ethan worked the register, misread 1 order, apologized twice, and learned the rhythm of small money passing from hand to hand. $3, $12, a tip jar filling with singles and coins. There was dignity in it, quiet and stubborn, a kind that did not need a board vote to exist. Emily watched him without hovering. When he grew too formal with customers, she said, "You are not closing a merger. You are selling coffee." When he smiled for the first time by accident, she pretended not to notice. By late morning, after the rush faded and the truck smelled of coffee grounds, lemon cleaner, and warm bread, Ethan stepped outside to flatten empty cardboard boxes by the curb. His phone had not stopped vibrating all day, but he had stopped checking it every time. That, in itself, felt like a small rebellion. Inside the truck, Emily opened the drawer beneath the counter and took out the sealed envelope from Lauren's attorney that Ethan had left beside his suitcase. She did not read it at first. She looked at his name printed in sharp black type and remembered the young executive who had once taken a violation notice from her shaking hands and solved a problem no one else had considered worth solving. When Ethan returned, she held up the envelope. "You should open this somewhere with coffee," she said. They sat at the tiny fold-down desk in the back, knees nearly touching the supply bins, while Ethan read the letter in silence. Divorce petition, asset separation, liability disclaimer, personal reputation protections. Every sentence had been polished until it no longer sounded human. Emily waited until he reached the final page. "May I see the business documents they attached?" Ethan hesitated, then handed them over. "It will not make much sense without the full company records." "Maybe not," Emily said. But her eyes had already changed. The softness stayed, yet something precise moved beneath it. The look of a woman who had survived because she learned to read the fine print before trusting the smile. That afternoon, while Ethan delivered extra meals to the clinic, across the street, Emily scanned copies of the petition, the bankruptcy notice, and the board resolution. She called a contact saved in her phone as Nora Tax Counsel, then another labeled Darius Compliance. Her voice remained low, practical, almost ordinary. She asked for public filings, court dockets, lien records, shareholder disclosures, anything tied to Caldwell Aerospace within the last 90 days. When Ethan came back, she had the laptop closed and was labeling soup containers. "Everything all right?" he asked. "We are low on chicken stock," she said, which was true, though not the whole truth. Over the next 3 days, Ethan learned the register, the prep list, and the strange peace of being exhausted by honest work. He carried produce from a wholesale market at dawn, wiped tables in a shared kitchen space in Queens, and learned that Emily paid every employee before she paid herself. At night, after he folded the apron and slept behind the desk, Emily opened files beneath the counter. Numbers began to line up in ways they should not. A shell consulting firm had received payments before the bankruptcy filing. A loan guarantee had been transferred to Ethan's personal liability without a meeting he remembered attending. One board signature matched an electronic approval sent while Ethan was in Denver, speaking at a manufacturing summit in front of 400 people. And beside one private equity notice, buried in a disclosure footnote, was the name Whitmore Capital Advisory, Lauren's family office. Emily sat very still when she saw it. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the awning in slow silver lines. Ethan slept 10 feet away, one arm folded under his head, his face less guarded in the dim light than it had been beneath the gala chandelier. Emily printed the page, slid it into a manila folder, and wrote one word across the tab in careful black ink. Truth. By the 4th evening, Ethan had stopped flinching every time a headline mentioned his name. The city had already found newer scandals to carry across its screens, but the damage stayed behind in quieter places, in canceled cards, unanswered emails, and the way strangers at the coffee line lowered their voices when they recognized him. Emily said nothing about the folder beneath the counter. She only asked him to polish the stainless steel trays, pack 200 dinner portions, and change into a clean white shirt before sunset. "We have a private catering job tonight," she said, tying her short chestnut hair back with a black ribbon. "Midtown. Investors. Try not to look like you are walking into a funeral." Ethan looked down at the navy apron folded over his arm. "Is that your usual advice for wealthy rooms?" "Only the ones that think they are more important than the food." A car service arrived at 6:30, not a van, but a quiet black Suburban with tinted windows and a driver who greeted Emily by name. Ethan noticed, but did not ask. He had learned in the last few days that Emily Harper carried more silence than most people carried explanation. They rode north through slushy streets as the city turned gold in office windows. Trays of warm chicken bowls, roasted vegetables, small cups of soup, and fresh bread sat secured in insulated carriers behind them. Ethan watched the blocks pass, feeling the old map of Manhattan rise inside him like an ache. He knew these towers. He knew the restaurants where deals began as jokes and ended as signatures. He knew the exact kind of smile men wore when they wanted to buy a company without saying they hoped someone else was desperate. The event was held on the 32nd floor of a private investment club near Bryant Park. The lobby smelled of leather, citrus, and expensive raincoats. A young coordinator met Emily near the service elevator with visible relief. "Miss Harper, thank goodness." They moved the presentation up 20 minutes. Emily only nodded and handed Ethan a stack of menu cards. "Set the front table. Keep your shoulders straight. He almost smiled at the instruction. Then the doors opened. The dining room was long and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, white tablecloths, low candles, and name cards printed in dark green ink. At the far end, a screen displayed the word Strategic Acquisition Dinner. Beneath it, smaller text read Distressed Assets, Aviation Technology, Hospitality, Partnerships. Ethan felt the air leave him slowly. On one table, near the window, lay a printed booklet. Caldwell Aerospace Asset Review. His name was not on the cover. Somehow that hurt more. Emily watched his face, then spoke in a voice only he could hear. Breathe. You are not here to beg for anything. Before he could answer, the room shifted the way it had shifted at the gala. A cluster of guests turned toward the entrance. Lauren Whitmore Caldwell walked in wearing a winter white suit, her blonde hair smooth against her shoulders, her expression calm with the confidence of a person who still believed every room had been arranged for her comfort. Beside her was Martin Voss, the private equity partner Ethan remembered from 3 board dinners and 1 phone call that had gone unanswered the night the vote removed him. Lauren saw Ethan almost immediately. Her smile paused, then sharpened into something polished enough for company. She crossed the room slowly, accepting greetings without taking her eyes from him. Ethan stood beside the catering table with a tray of bread in his hands and a name tag that said Ethan. For one brief second, humiliation tried to find the old doorway back into him. Then he remembered the truck at dawn, the register, the onions, the soup warming his palms. He set the tray down carefully. Lauren stopped a few feet away. Her gaze moved from his white shirt to the navy apron folded at his waist. Well, she said, softly enough to sound private and clearly enough to be heard. I wondered where you would land. A few nearby conversations thinned. Martin looked away, pretending to study the menu. Ethan did not answer. Lauren tilted her head toward Emily, who was arranging soup cups with steady hands. And this must be your new circle. The food truck girl and the fallen founder. That has a certain tragic charm. Emily placed the last cup in line, wiped one invisible mark from the table, and looked up. Dinner will begin in 5 minutes, Miss Whitmore. Lauren gave a small laugh. How professional. Then she turned back to Ethan. You should have accepted the settlement quietly. Rooms like this are not kind to men who confuse pride with leverage. Ethan felt every eye that had chosen not to look. He could hear the soft clink of glass, the hum of the heating system, the distant rush of traffic 32 floors below. He could have told her that he knew about Whitmore Capital Advisory. He could have said Emily had found the footnote. He could have asked why his signature appeared where it did not belong. But the truth was not ready for the room yet, and anger would only make Lauren comfortable. So he lifted a clean plate, placed it at the end of the line, and said, Enjoy your dinner, Lauren. Her smile flickered. Just once. Emily saw it. Ethan saw Emily see it. Then the lights dimmed for the presentation, and as Lauren took her seat at the front table, Emily reached beneath the linen-covered service card and touched the edge of a manila folder marked Truth. The presentation began with the confident boredom of men who believed numbers could make anything sound clean. A partner from Martin Voss's firm stood beneath the screen and spoke about distressed acquisition opportunities, operational restructuring, asset recovery, and market timing. Each phrase landed on the white tablecloths like polished silver, bright enough to hide what it had touched. Ethan stood near the service wall with his hands folded behind him, the navy apron tied at his waist, his name tag catching a small reflection from the candles. He watched slides move across the screen. Factory leases, patent portfolios, warehouse valuations, debt schedules, aircraft component contracts reduced to boxes and arrows. His company had once smelled of engine oil, warm metal, and coffee in paper cups at 4 in the morning. On that screen, it looked like something already buried. Lauren sat at the front table with her chin lifted, one hand resting near her water glass, calm as if she were attending the funeral of someone she had never loved. Martin Voss turned a page in his booklet and nodded at the exact places where nodding looked expensive. Emily moved quietly behind the guests, refilling coffee, replacing bread baskets, collecting empty soup cups. No one watched her closely. That was their mistake. She had spent years becoming invisible, in rooms where wealthy people mistook service for silence. When the speaker reached the final slide, the words Proposed Purchase Consortium appeared above a list of entities. Whitmore Capital Advisory was third. Ethan felt the name enter the room like cold air under a door. Lauren did not look back at him. She did not need to. The speaker smiled. We are pleased to move into final discussion with a lead hospitality and consumer growth partner who understands brand recovery at scale. A murmur passed through the room. Lauren leaned slightly toward Martin, her expression sharpening with interest. She had expected another private equity firm, another friendly circle, another table where her family name made the chairs softer. Then the doors at the back opened, and a woman in a dark green suit stepped in carrying a slim leather portfolio. Behind her came two attorneys, a compliance officer, and the young event coordinator who now looked far more nervous than relieved. The speaker's smile changed shape. Emily untied her navy apron slowly, folded it once, and placed it beside the serving tray. Ethan turned toward her. For the first time that evening, he saw the room recognize her before he fully understood why. Chairs shifted. A man near the window stood first. Then another. The speaker cleared his throat. Miss Harper, we were not expecting you to address the room personally. Emily stepped away from the service table. Her short chestnut hair framed her face neatly, and without the apron, the simple black dress beneath looked less like work clothing and more like restraint chosen on purpose. She took the leather portfolio from the woman in green and walked to the front with no hurry at all. I was not expecting my catering staff to be insulted by guests, she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried to the farthest candle. Lauren's smile froze. Your catering staff? Emily looked at her then, not harshly, not with anger, but with the steadiness of a receipt that matched the truth. Yes, Miss Whitmore. Harper Street Kitchen is mine. So is Harper Table, Harper Market, and the prepared foods division launching in 320 stores this spring. The food truck outside East 29th Street is where I still work when I need to remember what this company is supposed to be. No one laughed. No one reached for a glass. Ethan stood very still as the shape of Emily's life unfolded in front of him, larger than the truck, larger than the soup cups, larger than anything she had allowed him to see. The screen changed behind her. The logo appeared, Harper Street Kitchen Group. Beneath it, valuation estimates, national distribution agreements, community kitchen partnerships, and a confidential acquisition fund. Lauren glanced at Martin, but he was no longer looking at her. He was staring at Emily with the careful fear of a man who had arrived at the wrong table with the wrong story. Emily opened the folder marked Truth and removed the first document. Before my company considers any partnership tied to Caldwell Aerospace assets, there is a matter of liability. The attorney in green connected a laptop. The next slide showed a payment timeline. Consulting fees to a shell firm. Loan guarantee amendments. Electronic approvals. A board packet revised after distribution. A Denver conference timestamp beside Ethan's supposed authorization. Then, at the bottom, Whitmore Capital Advisory. Ethan heard a soft inhale from somewhere near the front. Lauren's fingers tightened around the stem of her water glass, but she did not drink. Emily did not accuse. She did not raise her voice. She only read dates, document numbers, transfer records, and names. Each fact took one more candlelit inch away from Lauren's composure. Martin whispered to his counsel. Two investors closed their booklets. One older woman removed her glasses and looked at Lauren as if seeing her clearly had become unpleasant. Ethan felt the room turning, not toward him as a spectacle, but toward the evidence as a tide. Emily clicked to the final slide. For the record, Harper Street Kitchen Group is withdrawing from all negotiations involving Whitmore Capital Advisory and Voss Meridian Partners until an independent review is completed. These materials have been provided to counsel, the bankruptcy trustee, and the appropriate regulatory offices. Lauren stood. You have no idea what you are interfering with. Emily closed the folder. I know exactly what I am standing in front of. The silence after that was not empty. It was full of recognition, of calculations collapsing, of people suddenly remembering every word they had spoken when they thought the woman serving soup did not matter. Ethan looked at Emily across the room, and she looked back only once. Not to rescue him, not to ask permission, simply to let him know the truth had arrived, and this time, it would not leave quietly. The room did not recover after Emily closed the folder. It only rearranged itself around the truth. Investors who had arrived with easy smiles now spoke in low voices to attorneys. Martin Voss stood near the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his polished confidence shrinking with every word he heard from the other end. Lauren remained at the front table, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, with the pale candlelight touching her winter-white suit and giving nothing back. Ethan watched her from beside the service wall, not with satisfaction, not even with anger. The strange thing about public humiliation, he realized, was that once you survived it, you could recognize it even on the face of someone who had given it to you. But recognition was not forgiveness, and pity was not a doorway back. Emily stepped away from the screen as the attorneys took over, answering questions with names, dates, filings, and copies already sent where they needed to go. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired in the clean, steady way of someone who had carried the right thing until the right moment and then put it down. Ethan crossed the room slowly, past the tables where people who had ignored him an hour earlier now made space without being asked. No one called him fallen. No one smiled behind a glass. The silence had changed its owner. Lauren intercepted him near the hallway, away from the screen, but not far enough from the light. For a moment, she looked like the woman he had once met at a museum fundraiser, sharp, beautiful, impossible to read, standing before a painting as if wealth and meaning were the same thing. "Ethan," she said, and it was the first time in days she had spoken his name without sharpening it. He stopped, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Lauren." She glanced toward Emily, then back at him. "This has become complicated." He almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because that was still how she tried to soften damage. Complicated. A word people used when simple truth became inconvenient. "It was complicated when my key card stopped working before I had been told why," he said. "It was complicated when my signature appeared on documents I never signed. It was complicated when you left a suitcase downstairs and called it separation." Lauren's composure moved slightly, like glass touched by heat. "You do not understand what pressure my family was under." Ethan looked past her to the windows, where Manhattan glittered in clean vertical lines, distant and indifferent. "I understand enough." She lowered her voice. "We can still handle this privately." That word returned to him from the gala, private, folded now in a different mouth, asking for the protection she had denied him. Ethan thought of the marble floor, the ring placed between them like a verdict. He thought of the security guard apologizing through a half-open door. He thought of Emily at the truck window, giving him soup without turning kindness into debt. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out Lauren's wedding ring. He had carried it since that night without knowing why. Not hope, not attachment. Maybe only because leaving it on a table had felt too much like letting her decide the ending. He placed it gently in her open palm. "I am done being useful to people who only call it love when the lights are on." Lauren looked down at the ring. No argument arrived quickly enough to save her pride. Ethan stepped away before she could build one. In the hallway, Emily waited near the service elevator with her apron folded over one arm and the folder now in the hands of counsel. "Are you all right?" she asked. He let out a breath that seemed to have begun 4 nights ago on the 53rd floor. "I do not know yet." Emily nodded. "That is an honest place to start." 3 weeks later, the bankruptcy trustee opened an independent review. The false approvals were challenged, the personal liability transfer was suspended, and Whitmore Capital Advisory withdrew from the acquisition under pressure that arrived quietly but firmly from every direction. Reporters wrote about governance failures, family office conflicts, and a founder cleared by records that had nearly been buried. Ethan did not read every article. He had learned that a name could appear in the news without returning a soul to itself. What healed him came slower. Dawn coffee from a paper cup. Clean shirts hung behind the truck office. Emily teaching him supplier margins with a pencil behind her ear. Former employees sending careful messages, not asking for favors, only saying they had hoped the truth would find him. 1 month after the gala, Ethan stood in the front window of Harper Street Kitchen Group's new central office in Queens, adjusting a navy tie before a meeting with community lenders and food entrepreneurs. His hair was neatly trimmed again. His suit was not the most expensive one he had ever owned, but it fit the man he had become. Behind him, Emily reviewed notes at a long wooden table, her short chestnut hair tucked behind one ear, her name printed on the glass door in letters larger than his had ever needed to be. She looked up and caught him straightening the knot. "Still doing that?" she asked. Ethan smiled softly at his reflection. Some habits survived for a reason. Outside, delivery trucks moved through morning light, carrying food to stores, shelters, offices, and street corners where someone might need warmth before they needed a miracle. Ethan did not win back the life that had left him. He built a quieter one from what remained. And beside the woman who had remembered his smallest act when the world forgot his name, he finally understood that redemption was not returning to the room that rejected you. It was walking into a new one without needing applause.